Move carefully or you'll spill it. Do you have the money to cover the damage? The shareholder's words cut through the gala's background noise, razor-sharp and icy, as Olivia placed a wineglass on the table. Around her, cruel laughter bubbled up, the kind that burns because it assumes you're insignificant. She was a single mother whose simple black uniform hung loosely on her petite frame, her face free of cosmetics, her chestnut hair secured in an unpretentious ponytail. The seven-star New York hotel sparkled around her. Crystal chandeliers casting brilliant light, polished marble floors reflecting every surface, each element proclaiming wealth. The table displayed a multi-billion-dollar merger agreement, while the room buzzed with billionaires, attorneys, and stockholders, all radiating the confidence that accompanies power. Olivia was merely the server, present to fill glasses and fade into the background. Yet when her gaze fell upon the contract, she went rigid. Moving closer, her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You mustn't sign that document." In that instant, Richard Hargrove, the billionaire host, took an action that left the entire room speechless. Olivia appeared out of place in that environment. Her beauty was understated and natural, gentle brown eyes that didn't seek attention, movements that were cautious yet confident. Raised among the nation's most affluent families, she'd learned to conduct herself with discipline and composure, but no one would suspect it. No designer garments, no flashy accessories, just a plain uniform and a serving tray. People observed her and perceived someone impoverished, someone who didn't belong. They criticized her for it, their remarks cutting and thoughtless, as if swatting away an insect. But Olivia was never truly invisible. When they crossed the line, she would respond, not with confrontation, but with a single phrase, spoken calmly and deliberately, that would silence them completely. The gala was an ocean of egos, each person attempting to outshine the others. The shareholder who had snapped at her, a man with slicked-back hair and a Rolex worth years of her daughter's childcare, reclined in his chair with a smirk. "Watch yourself, darling," he announced loudly enough for the table to hear. "Break a glass, and you'll be scrubbing dishes for 10 years. The woman beside him, her crimson dress screaming affluence, her lips forming a fake smile, chimed in. "How absurd! A server lingering around a billionaire's table." Another voice joined, a man with a pencil mustache and nasal tone. "She likely doesn't even comprehend what a merger involves." The table erupted in cruel, rehearsed laughter. Olivia continued pouring, her hands rock steady, her expression blank. She owed them no explanations. As Olivia moved to another table, a young woman in a shimmering golden gown leaned toward her companion, her voice deliberately carrying. "Notice her shoes," she said, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "They're practically disintegrating. Did she borrow them from the kitchen staff?" Her companion, a man with a perfectly groomed beard and smug expression, chuckled. "Probably. I'd wager she's here to smuggle out leftovers for dinner." The words struck like a slap, yet Olivia didn't pause. She straightened a napkin on the table, her movements precise and almost ritualistic, as though anchoring herself against their cruelty. Several nearby guests turned to observe, their eyes gleaming with amusement, anticipating her breakdown. She disappointed them. She simply collected an empty glass and continued, her silence more powerful than their mockery. "Hey, if this resonates with you, those moments when you've been dismissed, made to feel insignificant, could you help me out? Grab your phone, tap that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It's how we keep these stories alive, connecting with people who felt that same sting." All right, let's continue. The contract on the table commanded the evening's attention. Billions of dollars, entire corporations, all bound within pages of legal jargon. Richard Hargrove sat at the head, his silver beard neatly trimmed, his expression unreadable. He was the type of man who commanded attention without raising his voice. Around him, the room hummed with excitement. This merger represented their golden opportunity, a deal that would inscribe their names in wealth's history. Olivia was simply meant to keep wine flowing while staying invisible. But as she refilled a glass, her eyes darted to the contract. Her breathing stopped. She spotted it, a reverse takeover clause hidden deep within the legal language. Her deceased father, Professor Daniel Carter, had taught her about it years ago. "It's a snare," he'd warned, his voice grave as he sat at his cluttered desk with young Olivia. "It appears harmless, but will destroy a company within weeks." Her father had been an economics legend, the kind of man banks desperately sought for counsel. He'd died when Olivia was 16, leaving her and her mother with only his books and handwritten notes. She'd absorbed them all, every page, until the words became part of her. That's how she recognized that Claus would strip Hargrove's empire bare within 30 days. She didn't hesitate. Moving forward, tray still in hand, she whispered to Hargrove, "You cannot sign that." The room burst into laughter, as if she'd deliberately tripped and spilled wine. The attorney, a man with sharp spectacles and an even sharper tongue, leaned forward. "Who do you believe you are, daring to interrupt a billionaire?" His voice dripped contempt as the laughter intensified. A woman wearing diamond earrings the size of quarters turned to her companion, her voice loud enough to carry. "She must think she's in some fairy tale playing the hero," she said, her laugh high and brittle. "What's next? She'll instruct us on stock market management." The man beside her, his cufflinks catching the chandelier light, shook his head. "Pathetic. She's simply seeking attention." Olivia's jaw tensed momentarily, but she continued moving, setting down another glass. The weight of their words pressed against her, yet she didn't bend. She caught Hargrove's eye briefly. He hadn't laughed. He was studying her, his fingers tapping lightly on the table as if waiting for something. The businessman with the gold necklace snorted. "This is adult business. Go perform your serving duties." The woman in the red dress laughed so loudly it echoed off the walls. "She probably watches too many movies." The whispers grew, transforming Olivia into their joke. Someone signaled the manager, a thin man with a nervous smile, to remove her. The manager hurried over, his face flushed, muttering, "Olivia, what are you doing? You're creating a disturbance." She didn't look at him. Her eyes remained on Hargrove, who was now watching her intently, his head tilted slightly as if seeing her for the first time. At a nearby table, a man in a pinstriped suit, his face reddened from excessive whiskey, called out to Olivia as she passed, "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you focus on serving drinks? Leave the important decisions to people who actually belong here." His table burst into chuckles, and a woman with a sleek bob cut added, "Honestly, it's embarrassing. She's pretending to be one of us." Olivia's fingers paused on a wine bottle, her knuckles whitening momentarily. Didn't respond immediately, but tilted her head slightly, her eyes meeting the man's. "Do you always criticize what you cannot comprehend?" she asked, her voice gentle but unwavering. The table fell silent, the man's smirk disappearing. She turned away, her movement fluid, as if she hadn't just silenced a room full of egos. Olivia's grip tightened on the tray, but her voice remained composed. She indicated the contract, her finger unwavering. "Transfer of all parent company assets within 30 days. The laughter ceased. A shareholder with a thin mustache frantically flipped through the pages, his finger trembling as he read. His face turned ashen. "Impossible," he whispered. Another man, older, with a gravelly voice, leaned over, squinting at the text. The room buzzed with murmurs, the atmosphere shifting. They weren't laughing anymore. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and scoffed. "Reading isn't the same as understanding. This represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." His tone was like a teacher reprimanding a student who'd spoken out of turn. As the murmurs intensified, a woman in a silver gown, her voice syrupy with false kindness, leaned toward Olivia. "Honey, you're in over your head. Why don't you let the experts handle this? She smiled, but her eyes were frigid, as if daring Olivia to step out of line again. Olivia didn't flinch. She set down her tray, her movement slow and deliberate, and looked at the woman. If you're such an expert, why didn't you notice it? The question hung in the air, sharp and quiet, like a blade slicing through silk. The woman's smile froze, and the room's energy shifted again, unease spreading as people exchanged glances. The opposing CEO, a man with a square jaw and eyes that barely blinked, jumped in. Don't listen to some waitress fabricating stories. He smirked, leaning back. If she's so intelligent, why isn't she on Wall Street instead of cleaning tables here? The room laughed again, louder, as if they'd regained their confidence. Hargrove didn't laugh. He continued watching Olivia, his fingers resting on the contract. The manager grabbed her arm, not forcefully but enough to pull her back. "You're finished here," he hissed. Olivia didn't move. She held her ground, her eyes locked on the contract, then on Hargrove. In that moment, a passing server bumped into Olivia, causing a single glass on her tray to wobble. It didn't fall, but the clink was loud enough to draw attention. A man with a gaudy tie and even gaudier voice laughed. "See? Can't even manage a tray properly, yet she's trying to play corporate attorney." The room chuckled, but it was thinner now, less certain. Olivia steadied the glass with one hand, her face unreadable. She placed the tray on a side table and turned back to the contract, her voice cutting through the noise. "Page 47, line 12, read it." Her words were soft, but they landed like a gavel. The shareholder with the thin mustache scrambled to find the page, his hands fumbling. The room held its breath. As the room grappled with her words, a woman with a pearl-studded clutch, her voice laced with venom, leaned toward her friend. She's probably just repeating something she overheard. No way a girl like that understands corporate law. Her friend, a man with a slicked-back ponytail, nodded. I bet she's just trying to earn a tip from Hargrove. Their laughter was sharp, designed to wound. Olivia's hand paused mid-motion as she adjusted a napkin, her fingers lingering on the fabric. She didn't turn or acknowledge them, but her shoulders straightened, a subtle shift that said she'd heard every word. She walked to the next table, her steps measured, and refilled a glass with such precision it seemed like she was pouring defiance. The room's laughter faltered as if they sensed the tide changing. The tension was thick, like air before a storm. Olivia reached into her apron pocket and withdrew a yellowed piece of paper, worn soft from years of handling. He placed it on the table beside the contract. The room went quiet. It displayed her father's handwriting. Neat, slanted, unmistakable. A formula, an example, a warning. Never sign if you see clause XY. At the bottom was his signature, Professor Daniel Carter. A shareholder, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a pearl necklace, gasped, "My God, that's Professor Carter." She had worked with him once on a deal that saved her firm from collapse. Her voice trembled as she spoke. The silence was brief. A man in a gray suit, his voice sharp with impatience, barked, "Just coincidence. Who's to say she didn't forge it?" The shareholder with the thin mustache slammed his palm on the table. "Enough! We're wasting time because of a waitress." The room erupted in chaos, voices shouting over each other, some demanding to proceed, others whispering about the clause. Olivia stood there, her hands trembling just enough to notice, but her eyes remained steady, locked on Hargrove. Then, from the room's corner, a woman with a tight bun and clipboard, Hargrove's assistant, stepped forward, her face pale. She'd been silent all night, but now she spoke, her voice barely audible. I saw that clause too. She's right." The room turned to her, stunned, as if they'd forgotten she existed. As the argument swirled, A man with a booming voice and tailored tuxedo stood up, pointing at Olivia. "This is ridiculous. You're telling me we're stopping a billion-dollar deal because of her?" His face was red, his finger jabbing the air. "She's nobody." Olivia didn't blink. She picked up her tray as if to resume work, but her eyes met his. "Nobody saw what I saw," she said, her voice low, almost gentle, but carrying weight that made the man sit down. The room's energy shifted again, the air crackling with doubt. Hargrove's assistant clutched her clipboard tighter, her knuckles white, as if she wanted to say more but couldn't find courage. The room was fracturing, and Olivia stood at the center, unmoved. Hargrove sat motionless, his eyes closed as if weighing the world. Then, without a word, he grabbed the contract and tore it in half. The sound of ripping paper was like thunder cracking. He looked at Olivia, his voice low but clear. "If you hadn't warned me, I would have lost my entire empire." The room went dead silent. The lawyer's glasses slipped down his nose. The woman in the red dress stared at her plate. The opposing CEO's jaw tightened, his smirk vanishing. Several shareholders stormed out, their footsteps loud against the marble. They knew they had lost everything. But the room wasn't finished with Olivia. As she turned to leave, a man with a loud voice and louder suit called after her. "You got lucky, kid. Don't think this makes you somebody." His words were meant to cut, to pull her back down. Olivia paused, her hand on the tray, and turned to face him. "Luck didn't write that note," she said, her voice quiet but firm, like a door closing. The man's face reddened, but he had no response. The room watched as she walked away, her steps steady, her head high. The whispers followed, but they were different now, less cruel, more uncertain, like they were beginning to see her. Olivia didn't move. She stood there, tray in hand, as the room processed what had just occurred. The manager, hovering nearby, looked like he might faint. He muttered something about returning to work, but Olivia didn't budge. She wasn't finished. The weight of her actions was sinking in, not just for her, but for everyone. They'd nearly lost billions, and she'd prevented it. A waitress, a single mom who worked nights to buy diapers and pay rent. As she cleared a table, a woman in a navy blazer, her voice low and conspiratorial, leaned toward her friend. "I heard she has some connection to Carter. Maybe she's not just a waitress." Her freak. And a man with a slicked-back ponytail raised an eyebrow. "What? Like she's his secret daughter or something?" They laughed, but it was nervous, like they were trying to convince themselves it was a joke. Olivia overheard, her hands pausing on a plate. She didn't turn or acknowledge them, but her fingers tightened just enough to show she'd heard. The room was beginning to wonder, their glances lingering longer than before. After the gala, the mood shifted. Some guests tried approaching Olivia, their voices artificially sweet, as if they could erase their words. "That was impressive," one woman said, her smile tight as a drum. But behind her, others whispered, "Still just luck," a man muttered loud enough for Olivia to hear. The shareholder with the thin mustache snickered. "Even with a billionaire's attention, she's still a waitress." The manager pulled her aside later, his voice low and sharp. "Next time, don't interfere with guests' business." Olivia nodded, but her eyes were distant, as if she was looking beyond him, beyond the room, beyond the entire night. As Olivia stacked plates, a young woman in a sequined dress approached her, smile overly bright like she was auditioning for friendship. "You know, you really surprised us all," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you should take some classes. Make something of yourself." Olivia set a plate down, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked at the woman, her eyes steady. "I already am something," she said, her voice so calm it felt like a challenge. The woman's smile faltered and she backed away, muttering something about needing another drink. The other servers nearby exchanged glances, one suppressing a grin. Olivia returned to her work, but the air around her felt different, as if she'd claimed a piece of the room. She returned to work, collecting glasses and wiping tables. The gala was winding down, the room emptying. But something was different. The air felt heavier, as if everyone knew the nidge. Art had changed. Olivia moved quietly, her hands steady as she stacked plates. Occasionally, someone would glance at her, then look away quickly, as if afraid she'd notice. She didn't need to look. She knew their thoughts. Then a young server, barely 19, approached her, his voice low. "I saw what you did," he said, his eyes wide with awe. "You're not like them." Olivia gave him a small nod, nothing more, but her lips curved just enough to show appreciation. Then the door opened. Richard Hargrove walked back in. He wasn't loud or dramatic. He simply walked straight to the table where Olivia was clearing glasses and pulled out a chair. "Sit," he said. His voice was calm but firm, not asking. Olivia hesitated, her hands pausing on a glass. She set it down and sat, her apron still tied around her waist. The room, what remained of it, went quiet. Hargrove looked around, his eyes hard but steady. "From this day forward, you are no longer a waitress. You are my financial advisor." The gasps were audible. The woman in the red dress dropped her fork. The lawyer who'd stayed to network froze mid-sentence. Hargrove continued. "In a world full of greed, only those who stand for truth are worth trusting." Olivia's hands trembled in her lap, her eyes shining, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room understood. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She'd altered the fate of billions. The next morning, as Olivia walked to the bus stop, her phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert. Billionaire merger halted by unknown waitress. Her name wasn't mentioned, but the story was already spreading. She glanced at the screen, then tucked her phone away, her face unreadable. A woman passing by on the sidewalk, her arms full of shopping bags, stopped and stared. "Hey, are you her?" she asked, her voice curious but kind. Olivia just smiled faintly and kept walking, her worn sneakers quiet against the pavement. The world was starting to notice, but she didn't need it to. The fallout came swift. The lawyer who'd sneered at her received an email the next morning. Terminated. No explanation. The businessman with the gold chain woke to his name trending online, not for his wealth, but for his cruelty. Someone had recorded the gala, and the clip of him mocking Olivia spread like wildfire. The woman in the red dress lost her sponsorship with a luxury brand. They didn't want their name associated with someone who'd laughed at a single mom. It wasn't revenge, it was simply truth catching up, the scales balancing. As the news spread, Olivia's phone rang again, an unknown number. She answered, expecting a bill collector, but it was a reporter, her voice eager. "Is it true you stopped a billion-dollar deal? Who are you?" Olivia paused, her daughter's laughter echoing from the next room. She set the phone down without a word, her fingers brushing the edge of her apron, still folded on the counter. She didn't need to explain herself to the world. She'd done what was necessary. The reporter called back, but Olivia let it go to voicemail, her focus on the small hand reaching for her own. Olivia didn't return to the hotel. Hargrove's team called her the next morning, offering a contract, a real one, with a salary that made her blink twice. She sat at her kitchen table, her daughter asleep in the next room, and stared at the papers. Her father's old books were still on the shelf, their spines cracked from years of use. She ran her fingers over one, remembering the nights she'd sat at his desk, listening to him explain the world of money and power. She didn't cry. She just closed the book and signed the contract. Months later, she walked into a boardroom, this time in a plain gray blazer, no apron. The Shah Reholder with the thin mustache was there, pitching a new deal. He stopped talking when she walked in. A younger man stood to offer her his chair. The room was different now, not because of her title, but because of her. She didn't say much, just listened, her hands folded on the table. When she did speak, everyone leaned in, their pens pausing, their eyes on her. Her husband arrived late to one of those meetings. James Carter was quiet like her, with a presence that filled the room without effort. He walked in, nodded to Olivia, and stood by the door. The room shifted. The shareholder with the mustache looked down at his notes. The younger man fidgeted with his pen. Nobody said his name, but they knew James Carter, the man who'd built half the city's skyline. Olivia didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She just kept talking, her voice steady, her eyes clear. The people who'd mocked her never forgot that night. It stayed with them. In the jobs they lost, the deals that fell apart, the whispers that followed. Olivia didn't gloat. She didn't turn back to rub it in. She just kept moving forward, her daughter's hand in hers, her steps sure. Her silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strength. It was proof. Years ago, when Olivia was 12, she had sat in her father's study, a small room packed with books and papers. He'd been grading exams, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Liv," he'd said, not looking up. "People will underestimate you. They'll see what they want to see. Let them. The truth always comes out." She'd nodded, not fully understanding, but holding on to his words. Now, standing in that boardroom, she felt him there, in the way she carried herself, in the way she didn't need to shout to be heard. One evening, after a long day in the boardroom, Olivia stopped by her daughter's daycare. The teacher, an older woman with kind eyes, handed her a drawing. Bright cray, bronze, a messy heart with mom scrawled inside. Olivia's fingers lingered on the paper, her throat tightening. She tucked it into her bag next to her father's old notes and kissed her daughter's forehead. The teacher watched, smiling softly. "She talks about you all the time," she said. Olivia nodded, her eyes bright, and walked out into the evening, the weight of the day lifting just a little. The gala had been a turning point, but it wasn't the end. Olivia's life changed, but she didn't. She still wore plain clothes, still tied her hair back, still moved through the world with quiet grace. Her daughter, now 3, would run to her after daycare, her tiny hands grabbing Olivia's blazer. Those moments in their small apartment were what mattered. Not the boardrooms, not the contracts, not the billions, just the two of them building a life. The shareholder with the thin mustache never spoke to her again. He'd lost too much, his reputation, his influence. The lawyer tried to pivot, taking a job at a smaller firm, but the clip of him sneering followed him everywhere. The woman in the red dress faded from the social scene, her invitations drying up. None of it was dramatic. It was just life doing what it does when the truth comes out. Olivia's new role wasn't easy. The boardrooms were just as cutthroat as the gala, maybe more. People watched her, waiting for her to slip, but she didn't. She studied, worked late, asked questions when she needed to. Hargrove trusted her, not because of her name or her father, but because of what she'd done that night. She had seen what nobody else had. She'd spoken when it would have been easier to stay quiet. One day she found an old photo in a box. Her father smiling, holding her as a baby. She paused, her fingers tracing his face. She didn't linger long. She tucked the photo back in the box and went to pick up her daughter. Life kept moving, and so did she. The world had tried to break her, but it hadn't. She'd stood her ground, not with anger, but with truth, and that was enough. For those of you watching who felt that sting, who've been pushed aside, judged, or silenced, you know what Olivia felt. You weren't wrong. You weren't alone. Keep going. Your truth is enough. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing. Thank you for watching.